Do you believe in the existence of the unconscious? Of something more or less like what Freud called the unconscious. And clearly, positivism, cognitivism, or the contemporary ideology at the beginning of the 21st century, the dominant ideology of which we spoke from various points of view, disbelieve the unconscious exists. They believe it's an outdated concept, an illusion without future from the last century. We got the better of Freud. We overcame the unconscious. I'm not sure that belief is the appropriate word. But is it knowledge of the unconscious? Belief and Knowledge is the title of a famous book of a logician called Intica. Belief and Knowledge, and he believed that it was a clear-cut division between belief and knowledge. Lacan was not so sure there is such a division, a clear-cut division between belief and knowledge. At the root of all knowledge, you have belief. You have an act of faith, be it the element of Euclides. At the beginning, you need axioms. You need something supposedly self-evident which you won't question. And from that point, you can make deductions. But at the beginning, at the origin, you have to trust. You have to accept. Cardinal Newman wrote a book called The Grammar of Assent, where he tried to show that to say 2 + 2 or 4, you need an act of faith. And that was his way of introducing God in the matter. You have to accept the rules of addition. You have to accept a lot of supposedly self-evident truth. For Wittgenstein, for instance, at the root of all knowledge, you have a practice. You have a way of living. And for Lacan, well, at the root of the unconscious, there was a supposition. He called the unconscious the subject supposed to know. And Freud himself, he claimed for the unconscious nothing more than the value of being an hypothesis. And he tried to convey corroborating evidence of this hypothesis without crucial proof. So the unconscious remains as an hypothesis that you cannot disprove. And for Karl Popper, that was a central weakness of psychoanalysis, that you cannot disprove the interpretation of psychoanalysis. Well, it's a weakness, but there's a great distance between the existence of something or somebody and proof. In analysis, we meet people who need proof of their own existence. You meet people who eventually don't feel they exist at all, in spite of being a living being, working, sleeping, loving. But they have no proof for them that they exist really. Or you meet, I don't feel I exist at all, or I don't feel I exist for someone, or I don't feel I exist for the others, or I don't feel I exist as a woman, in spite of being a woman. Eventually, in spite of being a man. It happened also. Well, existence can be linked to some failure to give evidence. And to lead an evidence-based life is hard work. We listen to this. To get a self-audit is difficult, and so you go eventually to an analyst to be helped in your self-audit. That would be a way of presenting psychoanalysis as evidence-based psychoanalysis. We could re-engineer psychoanalysis as evidence-based psychoanalysis. As a matter of fact, the unconscious is not an objective entity. It takes place in a gap, and you have some testimony of its existence through parapraxis, through slip of speeches, through some failure of your behavior. So you need a gap to just not capture the unconscious, but to get a quick vision of the unconscious. And this gap can be filled up. For sure, the unconscious existed before psychoanalysis, but nobody paid attention. It was erased, or it was deified, or it was used for other objectives. And Freud said the unconscious opens up and then closes down. It doesn't speak all the time. And it speaks and gets silent. And the dominant ideology at the beginning of the 21st century in our democracies or developed countries is this ideology tried to silence the unconscious. The false promises of security, in my opinion, I read it like that, is an effort to silence the unconscious. The Freudian unconscious depends on the listener. If the listener is not there, how do you know the unconscious speaks? For instance, let's take psychosis and interpretative psychosis. When on the onset of a psychosis, everything begins to be significant for the patient, for the person. Everything begins to make sense. And generally, it's a menacing sense. So that person begins to read the contingencies of the world. It's not by chance that this man is passing in the street. It's not by chance that I was looked like that by this person. It's not by chance. So the world begins to make sense, a delirious sense, and the person reads the world like this. And when he's cured, or when he's appeased, at least, nothing is left to read. It just happened, like for the common man, let's say. He doesn't speak. With Freud, we've learned to read the unconscious. We learn to read symptoms, to see symptoms as text with subtext and subtext. And for the unconscious to speak, you need someone who listens. You need an audit in the etymological sense, which Michael Power recorded in his interview on the website of the London Society. Audit is to listen, etymologically. And if you suppress the listener, you silence the unconscious. You don't suppress the unconscious, but on the contrary, you nourish it by silencing it. And I would say that you intensify or exacerbate. Like, if you silence the unconscious, you exacerbate the drives. And you exacerbate the death drive. And the repetition, instead of being spoken, is acted out. And we assist in that. We in the world which is taken by a powerful death drive in the name of security and health. So the common ground of those ideology of security, as I listen to it, is suppress the psychoanalyst and death to the psychoanalyst. And that's, I believe, the core desire of the cognitivists. If I had time, and I would draw the diagram of Lacan, of what he calls the analytic discourse, and you'll see that what he writes down, it's a very simple diagram, but what he writes down is that you cannot control the unconscious. When you are analyzed, you do not acquire mastery of the unconscious. There is no master of the unconscious. The master of the universe, as they call themselves, the famous traders. And we see this week where they've been surprised by some kind of, I would say, the unconscious of the economy. I mean, some unknown combination of factors which result in a world surprise. So you are not safe from the surprises of the unconscious if you're analyzed. But let's say you are enlightened on your unconscious. You're supposedly able to read your unconscious, to read your dreams, to read your praxis. And at the same time, let's say, it's difficult to speak of what is the unconscious of an analyzed person. It's not the same as the unconscious of an unanalyzed person. But it's difficult to say. in some way it's depleted. In some way it's depleted also because generally when you have finished your analysis, you're older than when you began, and quite older. So you don't know if it's the effect of age or the effect of analysis. Well, but in some way, it's simplified. It speaks more clearly. And you read it, you receive some messages. And for myself, I do a lot of things according to my unconscious. I have great trust in the ideas I have just when I wake up. I have 2 or 3 ideas, and well, I just believe, that's a belief, that I have to trust those ideas, and there's something to it. So it's not, you don't acquire self-control. Not the self-control which is taught in the schools, which is forged and insert into you the self-control which intensifies the drives. But you, at the contrary, in an analytics session, you relax the stringent exigencies of self-control. You may say what you like. You must say what occurs to you. So what is forbidden in usual life is allowed in analysis. You're invited to speak your unspeakable desires. And if you don't, your dreams speak for you. According to Freud, everyone is a criminal in his unconscious. The Oedipus complex means that. Everyone is born a criminal, not legal, analytically. So there is something in analysis, a permissiveness in psychoanalysis, and in that sense, psychoanalysis is antisocial. That's right. It's just a part, it's an antisocial part of society. And so you don't get self-control through analysis, but you get, I would say, a capacity to dialogue with your unconscious and to put it to use, to work with your unconscious. Alors, that would be the true promises of psychoanalysis if we use this word. The false promises of security, which is the very intelligent title of this conference, I agree that security is what Lacan called a master signifier, a master word of the ideology at the beginning of the 20th century. I don't know if it's the master word. It's part of a cluster of master words. In some way, I won't develop, I feel that security as a master word is a transposition of what is certainty in mathematics or in mathematical logic. I feel also that the imperative of security is one with the imperative of health. They are supreme values nowadays. We shall make you secure and healthy. We shall protect, because we shall protect life, and eventually we are going to make your life miserable in order to protect it, and we will assure your well-being, which is exactly And that is part of what Freud called, he didn't speak of discontents. He spoke of das Unbehagen, the unease, not the well-being, but the bad being. It doesn't exist in English, but let's say the bad being in civilization. And that's why the master, the order is, we will assure your well-being. And that, I would say, the proof of, in our sense, the proof, it's of the title of Freud. It's because there is a Unbehagen in the civilization that the sloganeering is, we will assure your well-being. And what is health? An ancient definition is the silence of the organs. Health is the body will not speak. It's and desire, from the point of view of health, is clearly a disease. And this cult for security and health, as a matter of fact, this declaration of war against the death drive, this making ourselves soldiers of crusaders of the well-being, at the very inside of the protected space where you believe you're protected. In the very inside, there is an exteriority. There is an externality in the very inside, and that is the statute of all the Freudian phenomena. The Freudian phenomena strike from within, where you believe you're assured of your will to be there, of your thought. Inside it, someone is speaking, and you receive the messages without understanding them. So, and you see that in psychosis, where it is materialized in the, what we call in France, in psychiatry, mental automatism, when the patient hears voices in his head, in the most intimate of his being, others are present. And that is extimacy at its most intrusive. Lacan speaks once of extimacy, but made of it a fundamental concept, because it gives the statue of this present from within, and which is also the enemy from within, which we tried at the beginning of the 21st century, we tried to hunt it by all means, and we just intensify the phenomena because we don't understand the logic of it. I would say, and I will not develop, that for an analysis of fundamental insecurity is sexual insecurity. And for sociological reason, sexual insecurity is certainly exacerbated at the beginning of the 21st century. Something to say also would be necessary to say something about evaluation, which is at the service of this ideology of security. I would have presented it through three titles. First, digit, brain, and box. Digit is the general digitalization of the world. To be, it's an ontological shift which we have seen in our life, that nowadays to be is to be measurable. To be is to be digitalized. It's a criteria to be. brain, because all emotions, meanings, ideas, even the ideas of God, are nowadays systematically associated, linked to a cerebral quantity. And if fluids, be it blood or neurotransmitters, be it electricity, you can take any emotion, love, meanings, God, and you associate this notion to a given quantity which you measure. You decide it's the same, like said Professor Gombrich. And so nothing resists to this ideology, and all human life is supposedly quantifiable by this tour de passe-passe, this magical trick. It's nothing more than that. And as a matter of fact, the protest is inefficient. And I wouldn't advise us to specialize in impotent rage. I believe, on the contrary, that the unease is going to grow. And it's from where we are, we can, because the unease is growing, psychoanalysis can grow also if it's able to take the correct position in front of it. And I believe that CBT will be unbearable in the medium term, and I don't advise for any defeatism in front of it. That's digit, brain, box. It's the box of the questionnaire. We spoke about it this morning. With ticking the box, you can quantify anything. You take emotion, you take love, you just you give a scale from 1 to 5, and you ask the person just to tick the box. And with that, you begin to mathematize, you give it to mathematics, and you can write a treatise of 500 pages, and it's based on ticking the box. And you have all the literature which is a complete, it's a complete trick, a complete magical trick, which is not more complicated than that. Evaluation is not with us to disappear. It's a false procedure, it is deception, it's a make-believe, but it responds to an ontological shift, and it will not disappear from one day to another. So we need some cunning to deal with evaluation. I believe that as unease is going to grow, the psychoanalytic offer is to be maintained, and as addictions are going to multiply irresistibly in this context of universal digitalization, let us say that psychoanalysis is the best of addictions. And alors, now seriously, more seriously, you know that 450 guidelines are to be decided by the Health Profession Commission. And this is a deadly menace for psychoanalysis. A lot to be said. A deadly menace for psychoanalysis in Great Britain, but it's a very bad example for Europe and for the rest of the world. So my proposal for a new step would be to ask the London Society to organize another conference and with our friends, but also with some colleagues of other analytical groups, just to try to stop this stupid but deadly menace of the 450 guidelines. And hopefully, we are prevailing in France just now against a very bad text which was offered, known at the beginning of last July. We have a good chance to prevail. And why not try to prevail in Great Britain also? Thank you.